Okay, we've begun recording. Good afternoon. This is Michael Bowles with the Association for the Wolf Lake Initiative. Welcome to the fifth Calumet Revisited Forum of the year. I am co-host with Dr. Valerie Penninan, Professor Emerita of History at Calumet College. Before we hear from tonight's speaker, are there any announcements? If not, the 25th Annual Wolf Lake Bi-State Wetlands Wind and Water Festival starts at 9 a.m. Saturday, May 24th. With a mile walk between Wolf Lake and Powderhorn Lake and back. AWLI sponsors the event. The group's president, Dr. Phil Willink, will lead the walk from 133rd Street and Avenue K, south to 136th Street and east of Avenue K, and then back to the original spot. Second event of the Wetlands Festival, a hike, begins at 2 p.m. at the entrance to the Mitigation Wetlands in Hammond. Joe Kushek will lead the hike. It lies at the far west end of 129th Street. I might note that this is the last forum until September, when we will have Dr. Emiliano Aguilar, Assistant Professor of History at Notre Dame, speak about the history of East Chicago politics. Tonight's speaker is the aforementioned Phil Willink, an academic researcher at the Illinois Natural History Survey as a natural resource specialist and stream biologist. Frank, you ready?
I'm ready. How you doing, Mike?
All right. Phil, I'm sorry. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Would you like me to start?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Can I share? The classic, can I share? This me?
Yeah, you should be able to share.
Let me see here. How does that look to people?
Yep.
Good? We're all good?
Yeah, now, well, you need to click on your presentation, but we see your screen with, let's see, 2 PPTX files.
Oh, so it's not coming up. Hang on.
Yeah, you got to click on.
Do you see it now?
What we see is the videos folder. There's a folder labeled videos, blue, and then Chicago Region Fishes,
Hang on. Yeah, let me try something else
DEOS.
here. Applications window.
Yeah, what if you just click on one of those PTX folders? No?
It should. Hang on. Let's see here. Are you seeing it now?
Oh,
No.
Yeah, a white screen with 4 files named.
Okay, hang on there. Let me try this again. Finder or desktop?
There it is.
Okay. Can I move this out of the way without losing it? Probably not. I won't do that.
Okay. Go.
Okay, so you can see it now.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's see if I can move. There we go. Got it. My Zoom updated. It got crazy on me. Okay. All right, so everybody can see the book cover now.
Yep.
Okay. Um, yeah, so we're going to talk about fishes of the Chicago region. Yes, it is a book that Frank and Steve and I have coming out. This talk isn't just about the book, although I will certainly refer to it often enough. But it's also going to be a bit more general, covering the fishes of the Chicago region, and as far as that topic goes. Some people have been wondering, so what is the book about? Why did you write it? That sort of thing. And one way to do that is we could have titled it slightly differently, something like this. Let's see here. Okay, now there we go. Could have called it Our Local Fishes Are So Incredibly Awesome, and we are just so obsessed with this amazing natural resource that we just had to write a book about these wonderful animals to share their beauty, resourcefulness, and need for conservation. And although that might be a more detailed book title, it'd be a terrible title for marketing. So obviously we just went with the Fishes of the Chicago region, which is basically just a field guide. But we will talk a bit more about that in a bit. This is not the first Fishes of the Chicago region publication. Have been some others. The first one was actually by someone called Seth Meek and S.F. Hildebrand. They wrote back in 1910 a synoptic list of the fishes known to occur within 50 miles of Chicago. Once again, this is over 100 years ago. Seth Meek worked at the Field Museum. He made collections throughout the Chicago area, including this fish down here, which is a brook silverside that he collected in Wolf Lake in 1898. The specimen's still at the Field Museum, and it might even be in the Wolf Lake exhibit in the Conservation Hall. I forget now, but anyways, it's somewhere there in the building. There have been some other papers covering fishes over the years, various research papers. There have also been a lot of papers not on fish, but on Chicago region flora and fauna. For example, back in 1964, Clifford Pope wrote Amphibians and Reptiles of the Chicago Area, which is one of the best book covers ever, right here. Despite what you might think of this book cover, the inside is actually quite amazing. It's full of a lot of useful information. It's a very scholarly work. More recently, there's Joel Greenberg. He wrote A Natural History of the Chicago Region, 2002, also put out by University of Chicago Press that did our book. If you do natural history stuff in the Chicago region, you really should read this. It's a wonderful book. There is also the Flora of the Chicago region or Plants of the Chicago region. There's a couple on birds, smaller ones on birds, and another bunch of other publications as well. And kind of what I'm saying is there is something of a history here going back 100 years of various people writing books and papers on the flora and fauna of the Chicago region. Some of you may be wondering, so what do you think is the Chicago region? And this is how we have defined it in our book. And it's very similar to what you would see with Chicago Wilderness, now known as Chicago Wilderness Alliance. So it is basically parts of Wisconsin, northeastern Illinois, northwestern Indiana, a little bit of Michigan, and then southern Lake Michigan. Covers an area about 50 to 75 miles from downtown Chicago. Switching to a slightly different map, here's one showing watersheds. One of the things that makes the Chicago region special is it is on the junction of two large watersheds. It's at this nexus, which is one of the reasons why Chicago was founded here, primarily for trade and the ability to move back and forth between these two basically methods of transportation, or at least historic methods of transportation. On the one hand, we have the Great Lakes, largely represented by Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan alone is the fourth largest freshwater lake on the planet by area. It is fifth largest by volume. So that's a massive amount of water. That's just Lake Michigan. And then over here we have the Mississippi watershed. It is the fourth largest watershed on the planet in terms of area and 10th in charge of discharge, which is another measure of volume. So once again, these are some very big aquatic systems with Chicago right on the edge of that. Now, historically, if there was a heavy rain, this area was so flat that it would flood and water could go back and forth. And if water went back and forth, so would fishes. All right. So there was a mixing of the Great Lakes and the Mississippi. Actually, for hundreds to actually thousands of years, Lake Michigan flowed this direction out into the Mississippi. So this sort of watershed divide is relatively recent, at least in geological terms. Another way to look at this, and this is just a line drawing of some of the rivers. The primary rivers of the Kankakee down here in the south. We have the Des Plaines, and then the Fox, and then the headwaters of the Illinois River up here, as well as all kinds of other little creeks and stuff. Largely, the Chicago region is following watershed boundaries, but some exceptions were made in that we have the headwaters of the Kishwaukee up here, even though that's part of the Rock River, and we don't do the Rock River completely. We don't have all of the Iroquois down here either. But by and large, it's based on watersheds. We see some others in the St. Joseph. If you go and you look at the different habitats in the region, we have lakes. So we have Great Lake, like Lake Michigan. Then we have a very different habitat. This is Lake Michigan, 200 feet below the surface, which is very different from the shoreline. Then we have various inland lakes and ponds, like this one here next to an oak savanna. And we have various rivers and streams, the largest one being the Illinois River, but we also have some very small creeks like this small forest stream here. We have the Chicago River, which is one of the most urban rivers on the planet. Excuse me. And then we should not forget the seasonal intermittent creeks. So this is basically this in the spring when there's a lot of water, this would be flowing. But in the summer, it's broken up into isolated pools. And so this pool right here is actually not connected to any others. And when we surveyed it, there was actually a half dozen species of fish in this pool, basically waiting for another rainstorm to come along so that they can move up and downstream. And this is another sort of critical part of a lot of the ecosystem processes around here, and one that we shouldn't forget about. So if you take sort of the biogeography of the region with the different watersheds, the different regions, all these habitats, you put all that together, you end up with 164 species of fish within the Chicago region. At least that's how many we are recognizing. These aren't just randomly scattered throughout the book. We do organize them, and they are organized primarily by family. And so if you want to figure out which family you would like to look at, we do have a family key that you can go through. And this will then help narrow down where you may want to read or focus your interest. Within each family, there is a page or two of text covering sort of general information for that particular family. And then within that are all the species. The species are organized alphabetically by scientific name. Each species gets 2 pages, and each species account includes the common name, scientific name, the etymology or how the scientific name came into being, a picture of the fish, and this is pictures usually there to try to help you identify the fish. That's the purpose of the pictures, and that's sort of the style that we took the pictures. There's a description to help you ID the fish. There's some text on its natural history, some very quick biology about it, a description of the distribution and status of each one of them. Is it common, not common, rare, endangered, that thing. And then each species also has a map, and these are dot maps, so that you can kind of see where they are. These dots are largely based on fisheries data or museum data. So they're pretty solid that way. The reason I say that is we know that there are reports of species above and beyond these particular dots, and sometimes we may allude to that in the distribution down here. For example, we know that there's a lot of northern pike popping up along Lake Michigan. We may mention that down here, even though there may not be dots up here. So if you want to get a full idea of where to find these fish, look at the map and read down here. And then there's some references for additional reading if you so wish. Um, the families are basically organized phylogenetically, that is, family tree, starting with the most ancient or most primitive, and then working our way forwards. Um, the most ancient family of fishes, if you will, are the lampreys. I suspect that when I mention the name lamprey to this audience, you immediately think of the sea lamprey, which is rather infamous. It's an invasive species. It invaded the upper Great Lakes in the 1920s by going through the Welland Canal and bypassing Niagara Falls. It has a mouth that looks like this, technically an oral disc with all these teeth, and then rasping jaws down here. It latches on to the side of fish, bores a hole in them, such as in this lake trout, and then sucks out their bodily fluids, and that's how they feed. And so they can cause a lot of damage to the fisheries of the Great Lakes. And there's been a lot written about them. And you can go on, you can give a whole talks just on lamprey. They do latch on to fish. On large fish, there could be several lampreys per fish. Occasionally, they do latch on to people. This is not common, but it can happen, especially in extenuating circumstances, like you stick your hand in a net and try to pick one up. Uh, now, even though everybody's always fixated on the invasive sea lamprey, we do actually have native lamprey in the area, several species of native lamprey. Oh, another thing. Um, Technically, lamprey are not fish. They're their own particular group. But they are more fish-like than anything else, so they get grouped together with the fish. And one example of a very ancient lamprey is something called the Tully monster. This is actually the official Illinois fossil. You can find these in the Maison Formation and nodules. These are some that were on exhibit at the Field Museum if you want to go see what they look like. I know it's a little difficult to see whatever is happening in these rocks right here, but here's an artistic representation of that. So this is a Tully monster, and it is supposedly, according to recent thought, a very ancient form of lamprey. There is some disagreement about this, but most people seem to think that's what the case. But it is pretty crazy to think that 309 million years ago, part of the Chicago region looked like this with these things swimming around out there. But not here today. Today, we have the lampreys look like this. As I said earlier, most people are fixated on the invasive sea lamprey, but we actually have several species of native lamprey. One of the more common ones right here is called an American brook lamprey. These species are actually relatively sensitive to environmental degradation. They need clean water and habitats in order to survive. Many are listed as threatened or endangered. And if you find them, they're typically indication that it is a fairly healthy habitat. So even though there's a lot of negative connotations associated with the invasive lamprey, native lamprey are typically a good sign if you find them. The previous picture was an adult. These are juveniles. Juveniles do not have the mouth with the teeth and all that sort of thing. They look basically like worms, and all they really do is filter feed microscopic plants and organisms out of the water. And that's how they feed. And they have a very interesting life cycle. So right here, you have spawning of the lamprey. The young then drift downstream. They turn into what are called these ammocetes, those kind of worm-like things I showed you. They actually burrow into the sediment tail first, will then stick their head out to feed, filtering small microorganisms out of the water. And they remain in this stage for several years, at which point they undergo a metamorphosis, kind of like a caterpillar to a butterfly. They go from this stage to their adult form. When they're adults, there are two different types. There can be the parasitic species that feed on other types of fish, like I talked to you like I mentioned with the sea lamprey. And these usually are in this stage for a year or so, maybe a little bit longer. They feed on adult fish before spawning. But there's also non-parasitic adults that never feed. They don't feed for a couple to several months, and they just basically the adults spawn and then die, and that's it. And of our local species, half of them are actually non-parasitic, and the other half are parasitic. And you can often tell them apart because the parasitic have a lot more teeth than the non-parasitic because these never actually feed. All right. Um, Another interesting fish from the Chicago region, the largest one is the lake sturgeon. And I'm going to suspect most of you have heard of sturgeon. It is actually really hard to figure out what the maximum historic size of lake sturgeon is. What we do know, and we have solid data, that they are at least, there are records that they are at least 8 feet long and 300 pounds. So we have good scientific evidence for that. But there are stories that they could be 10 feet or larger, and that is very possible. They very well could have been that large. Um, we just cannot definitively prove it right now. They are also relatively long-lived. It is very difficult to know what the maximum age is, but estimates are anywhere from 50 to 150 years. So they can live a very long time. But they take a very long time to mature, somewhere between 10, 15, 20 years. These were overfished in the 1800s. They became very rare in the Chicago region. They are now making a recovery in other states like Michigan and Wisconsin, and we're starting to see more and more of them. But largely, those are individuals swimming from the north down to the southern basin of Lake Michigan. Another interesting fish is called the American eel, and this is the long distance record holder in terms of swimming. And I say that because no American eels are born in the Chicago region. They actually all spawn in one place, and that place is the Sargasso Sea, which is out here in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And they spawn a couple hundred to several hundred feet below the surface. All American eels spawn here. Vast majority of them swim to rivers along the east coast of the United States, but some of them actually swim through the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, up the Mississippi, all the way to Chicago. That's a distance of 3,000 miles. So if you see an eel in Chicago, it swam 3,000 miles to get there. In the 1800s, there are records that it was not unusual to find eels. These days, we do not see very many of them, largely because there's so many locks and dams along the Mississippi that this has become a very difficult trip. But they're still around. And then once they're here, they stay here for either several years, possibly a couple decades to several decades. These fish can live up to 50 plus years. And then they swim all the way back to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean to spawn, which is pretty crazy. Uh, the most speciose family in the Chicago region are something called true minnows, which is now in the family Lucicidae. It used to be called Cyprinidae, but that was broken up into three different other families now. But basically, a quarter of the species in the Chicago region are what are considered minnows. When most people think of minnows, they think of things that are brown and drab and uninteresting and relatively small. Partially correct. Many of them do tend to be brown and drab. They do tend to be just a few inches. But if you understand the ecology of minnows, they can be incredibly informative. As a matter of fact, when we do fish surveys, we probably get more information out of minnows than just about any other species. And why I say that is because even though they can be difficult to identify, I will admit, if you get an eye for it, they have very specific ecologies. And by understanding those ecologies, they tell you a lot about the environment. Some are very tolerant of pollution, some are not. Some like sand versus mud versus this. Some have very particular habitat requirements, and others are more generalist. So by looking at what species of minnows you catch in a particular stream or survey or wherever you happen to be, that tells you a lot about the health of the ecosystem. So even though many people think these are uninteresting and by correlate unimportant, the opposite is actually true. They are incredibly informative once you get to know them. Now, in this particular stream right here, and I'm not going to pretend that this is typical, but if the timing is right and you're in the right place, you may see something like this. And let's make sure.
Oh my.
So this is a spawning aggregation of southern red-bellied dace. And notice how clean the gravel is. Every once in a while, you may see a little poof or a cloud, and those are eggs, so they're laying eggs and milk. In the background, you see a couple of larger fish, different species. All right. So what I'm going to do is show you a close-up. Okay, so this is an aquarium on the side of the bank of that same stream with some of those same fish. A couple of things I want to point out. One, the water's very clear. Not all our streams are like that, so it's very clear water. Also, a lot of condensation. The water was cold, all right, and certain species of fish really like that. Once again, different minnows have different habitat requirements, and they just happen to like clear water, cold water. The star of the previous video was this thing right here, southern red-bellied dace. And don't tell me this couldn't be an aquarium fish. These are really beautiful fish. And they are fairly common around here. I mean, they're not that unusual. The one swimming in the background was something called a common shiner. And these can be, quite striking, as you can tell from this picture right here. But I should be honest and say this is what the breeding males look like. Most of the time, if you find the females or non-breeding males, they are admittedly rather brown and drab and not nearly as exciting as this. But the males do look like this. There is another closely related shiner called the striped shiner. The common shiner, if you go up to Wisconsin, you find almost all common shiners. Go to central Illinois, and you will find almost all striped shiners. Here in the Chicago region, we find both, but they tend to interbreed or hybridize. So we are actually in a rather unusual hybrid zone between these two species. And that can make them kind of difficult to identify at times. But another reason I bring this up is that scientists have recreated where this hybrid zone was in the past. And as it turns out, this hybrid zone between these two species is gradually shifting northward and has been for hundreds of years. And it is doing that in relation to the fact that we're coming out of a glacial period and the world is warming up. And they are tracking those temperature changes, and the ranges of these two species is gradually shifting northward with this overlap in between that at the moment happens to be in the Chicago region. Here's another fish. It wasn't in the video, but it was in the stream, and it's called something called a horny-head chub. And it's called horny-head because it has these little horns on its head. These are actually called, we actually call them breeding tubercles. And many minnows have these. Some other fish in the family Catostomidae, suckers, red horses have these. And they are there to increase tactile stimulation between the males and the females during spawning. Spawning with this fish, the horny-head chub, is interesting because they are pretty impressive architects for a fish. And so it doesn't show it very well in this picture. But this is a pile of gravel. It's about 2 feet this way, about a foot this way, and several inches tall. And what happens is this fish, which is maybe 5-6 inches, maybe a little bit bigger than that, has cleared this area of all loose sediment. And it then has used its mouth to move pebbles and gravel out of the way to create trenches. They then lay eggs in those trenches. The male then uses its mouth to carry these pebbles and gravels to cover up those trenches with the eggs. And then slowly over time, they keep laying eggs and it keeps piling this gravel on here until it forms these mounds. So this mound here is full of eggs. And the reason it does this is that if there's a lot of silt or sediment, that runs the risk of smothering the eggs. They suffocate and they die. That's not going to happen here because this is relatively clean. There's water moving through here. The eggs are also protected from predators. So it's a safe place to raise for the eggs to hide and to hatch, and then for the young to live for a little bit before they move on. Other minnows realize this and will lay their eggs on the same sort of like spawning mounds, is what we call these right here. And if you get an eye for this and you can walk up and down our streams around this time of year, you can find one of these that sometimes every 10, 15, 20 feet. You'll find these weird mounds of pebbles and just realize that it took hours and hours and hours for a small fish to carry all the rocks to this place to build these. And yet another famous fish that we have in the region is the long-nosed dace. And this is famous because this is the official fish of the city of Chicago. And I'm kind of curious as to how many people knew Chicago actually had an official fish. Many states have official fish, not many cities do. But this one, but Chicago does. And the way this was decided is that there are actually several nominees a number of years ago, around 20, and in true Chicago fashion, they held an election. And in true Chicago fashion, a particular constituency overwhelmed the election, and in this case, it was school kids fell in love with the description of this particular fish and voted it in. And I don't know if Frank wants to step in here if you want to say anything about this, as I think you may know more about it than I.
No, I don't want to indemnify myself in promoting certain fishes to be elected. I try to stay out
Okay.
of politics, being in the federal government.
There you go. All right. So somebody wrote some very clever descriptions of several of the species of the fish, and it was written that, if I remember, they like to body surf in the waves, and the kids loved that description, and basically voted in the long-nosed dace, which was a very cool choice. I forget the other ones. I think it was yellow perch. It might have been bluegill or something. But anyways, Chicago has an official fish, and it's a minnow. And you can find these if you go swimming along the lakefront. They're all up and down the lakefront. Another group of fish called another family, Catastomidae. These are the suckers, red horses, carp suckers. These fish have their mouth underneath, and so they forage in the bottom sediment. This is something called a northern hogsucker. This is something called a river red horse. This is actually a threatened species in Illinois. One thing that's interesting about the river red horse that I'm going to call out is that this is what's called a pharyngeal jaw, and it has malariform teeth on it. Now, many species of fish have two sets of jaws. They have sort of the normal set of jaws where you would think they would have them. But then they will have a second set of jaws back here in the throat. And this is a set of jaws back here in the throat. It has very robust teeth, and it uses these teeth to actually crush mollusks. So snails, clams, that sort of thing. This is very rare around here. There's two or three other species of fish that do this, but not many. And it's very hard to make a living trying to eat or trying to find enough snails and clams to feed on. But the river red horse is one of them. And this fish gets up, 2-ish feet long, a couple feet long. So it's a good sized fish. And so that's kind of an unusual thing about it. It's a little hard to see, but this is actually a spawning migration of two species of suckers. There's a shorthead red horse and quillback in here. There's a couple dozen just in this picture. There were hundreds in this creek. They were swimming out of a large river into a smaller stream. And what they were doing is they're going to swim upstream until they found a place that looked something like this, a gravel bed in a riffle, and they would spawn at this point. And this right here is presumably a female, because typically what happens is a female. It's flanked on either side by males. She will wiggle and release her eggs. The males then wiggle, do their thing, and then the eggs are fertilized and then drift down once again into the gravel. Once again, and this is a common theme, this is clean. They look for a place with clean gravel so the eggs could be protected and won't be smothered by sediment and are well aerated. Another thing about suckers is I mentioned that they have their mouth sort of underneath them. They feed actually in the sediment by taking in a mouthful of sand, silt, and then aquatic insects, bugs, what have you. They put this mixture in their throat or in the back of their mouth. They have these pharyngeal arches. So the pharyngeal arch with the teeth is this structure right here that I kind of showed earlier with the red horse. But they also have these gills with gill rakers right here. These gill rakers are moved up and next to something called a palatal organ, which is a muscular tissue on the roof of the mouth. There's taste buds all over the gill rakers and this palatal organ. If it tastes food, little finger-like projections come out of this muscle and pinch the food between the gill rakers and the muscle. It uses water currents to wash away the sediment and sand, leaving it with just a mouthful of basically aquatic bugs, which it then eats. And if you want to read more about that, there's a 300-page dissertation that you can read, but you're certainly not forced to do so. Speaking of taste buds, catfish. Called catfish because of the whiskers that you can see here, which are called barbels. Um, what people are what's less well known is that these barbels are covered with taste buds. They do have taste buds in their mouth as well. But there's also taste buds all over these barbels and on the side of their head and every place else. Catfish literally taste their environment. They're primarily nocturnal. Their vision is okay, not great, but they are able to find prey by tracking it down by scent. They can basically taste it and they follow these taste trails through lakes and rivers until they find their prey that could be either dead or alive. They'll eat either. And then they basically track it down and that's how they find food. And they're surprisingly voracious predators. Another interesting about catfish, they have sharp spines in these fins right here, and they have venom in those spines. And depending upon the fish, on which species, the toxicity of that venom varies. Typically, the smaller the species, the more painful the venom. So smaller species like mad toms that are several feet or several inches long can give very painful stings. So try not to get stung by any of them. They also have some interesting young behavior, as you'll see in this video. So this is a school of baby black bullhead, each one about 2 inches long. And they do this for protection, we assume, forming these mass groups like this. Now, sometimes there are ways to sort of increase the amount of protection, and I'll show you that here in a moment. Sometimes the adult one, either a mom or a dad, we're not sure which, is there to help protect the young. So that actually is one of the adults coming out to try to scare away the camera away from here. Now, catfish, they are a popular sport fish. They're very tasty. People like to catch them. There are other game fish in the book, and that would be my beagle. These are covered in the book. I'm not going to talk about them too much right now. This is northern pike, brook trout, lake trout. Northern pike, they're becoming more and more common in the Des Plaines River and the Chicago lakefront, which is always encouraging. Brook trout are in the Chicago region. We're kind of on the southern edge of where they are. You really need to go up into Wisconsin if you really want to go brook trout fishing. Lake trout, they're also on the increase. It's surprisingly how large a lake trout you can find in relatively shallow water, like 10 feet of water along Lake Michigan. So these are in there. I'm not going to talk about them too much tonight, though, but they're in the book. Related to the trouts is this. Now, you may be looking at this picture and wondering why we would use a picture like this, especially since earlier I said that most of the pictures were there to help you identify the fish and that this is a pretty rough shape. This is an example of a species called the deepwater cisco. It was only ever known from Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, no place else on the planet, only from Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. The last individual seen in the wild was in 1952. We have not seen one since, and it's commonly considered to be extinct, no longer in the wild. Maybe it's still swimming around out there, maybe it's not, hard to tell, but in the deep waters of Lake Michigan. The only places you're going to be able to see one of these are in museum collections like the Field Museum, like this specimen right here. Now, we had a choice. We could have used old drawings of these from publications in the 1920s or whatever, or we could have used this. And the authors, we went back and forth about this and finally ended up using these pictures. It's somewhat artistic, I think, to represent them this way. And it also is a little kind of poetic and informative in that this is sort of the current state of this species. You know, you can't find it in the wild anymore. This is what they look like now, and that's about it. So it does make a statement, even if you can't really identify this fish uh, from an image like this. But then again, you're not going to be finding one of these out in the wild anymore. Skipping to a different family, there's something called a pirate perch. It's not actually a perch. It is something of a pirate, but these only get like 3, 4 inches long, maybe 4 or 5 inches long. What's unusual about these is the position of their anus. And I say that because in most fish, the anus is right here by the anal fin. Um, but in pirate perch, when they hatch, it is there. But as they grow older, it actually migrates forward until, and I tried to line these up, this is the bottom view, it is actually in their throat region. All right, which is unusual. Now, if you look at the genus name for this, it's in the genus Ephredoderus, which in Greek, aphod means excrement, and der is throat. So it means excrement throat, which is the PG version of how to say their genus name. Um, and it is fitting because that's where this is. Now, you may be asking, why would a fish do this? There are some other fish that have the similar position, the similar anatomy, namely some cavefish and spring cavefish. And the thought is that in all of these, these are mouth brooders. And what that means is they put the eggs in their mouth to take care of them and to protect them. And so if what is your general opening is down here, the eggs are extruded out here, they can then be sucked up into the mouth, and then the pirate perch can keep them in the mouth and protect the eggs until they hatch, and then the young can swim out. So it's trying to keep them safe. That's one thought as to why it's here. Another thought, and there's some discussion back and forth about this, is that these fish live in root wads and vegetation underneath banks, so very, very dense areas where they're hiding, and they will often just stick their head out. And it may be that they will stick their head out to look around. They can then defecate without having to foul their habitat and then go back in there. And that way they are able to defecate without swimming out there and exposing themselves to predators or not. What the actual reason is, it's probably a combination of the two, maybe, but everybody's, has their own opinions about that. Another family of fish is the Centrarchidae. These are the bat and sunfishes, basses and sunfishes. Here's a couple smallmouth bass. Very popular sport fish, largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, and even the sunfishes as well. Here's a rock bass just sort of cruising along. Here's a bluegill, state fish of Illinois. And what's interesting about this that I'm going to tell a little story about is that back in 1919, the ichthyologist at the Field Museum was someone named Carl Hubbs. And at that time, the Field Museum was actually in the building of the Museum of Science and Industry. So MSI did not exist at that time. The Field Museum was in that space. He worked there. And he would go out to the Jackson Park lagoons and he made collections of fish, but he would also watch fish. And he watched sunfish like bluegill spawning in those ponds and then wrote a paper about it. And so what happens, and it's a little hard to see, there's the bluegill right here. It has actually cleared away all the sand and sediment from this to make the bottom clean. Once again, we're seeing this over and over again. Clean gravel. A lot of fish like to clean gravel so eggs don't get smothered. And what happens is that after it cleans out this nest, and this can be in just a couple feet of water to 10 feet of water, and bass do the same thing. All the sunfish do basically the same thing. A female will come along, and if the nest and the male is to her liking, she will then come in and lay her eggs. And we'll see that here. So these are actually pumpkin seed. It's a male and a female. The male has the red spot on the side of the perkle or side of the head. He just darted off. He'll be back here in a minute. The female does not have that red orange spot, but if you look at her belly, it is swollen and it is swollen with eggs. So now they will now swim around in circles. She will eventually lay some eggs down in there. And when she is done, she will swim off, but the male will stay there and protect the eggs. So if a crayfish or another fish or even a person comes along, he will sit there and try to scare them away. And you can see right here, he kind of flared the side of his head. They do that to make themselves look bigger. And so he will stay there and try to protect the young, protect the eggs. Once they hatch, may even protect the young for a while. And if things go well, and I'm going to skip species here, you could end up with something that looks like this in a month or so. These are all baby largemouth bass. Now, I don't know if they all came from the same nest or not, or just a bunch of them from the same area, but clearly the eggs did very well there. The parents did a good job protecting them. Sometimes the parents will tag along with these schools, apparently to protect them for a little bit. Once they're this size, I don't see that quite so much, but when they're smaller, they do. I have a video of that, but it's not quite as interesting. All right, just a couple more groups that I'm going to talk about. Darters, these are one of the more colorful fish that we have in the area, and they're in the family Percidae. Yellow perch, walleye, sauger are also related to these, but these only get 2, 3, 4 inches long. They can be greens, yellows, oranges, blues, well, all kinds of different colors. This one's unusual. This is a fantail darter, and it has these yellow blobs on the tip of on its fin. They actually lay their eggs in little small caves on the roofs of caves in rubble piles. And this is a male that has these, and the thought is that it is trying to trick the females into thinking that it is a good dad and that there's more eggs on the surface of these caves, and that if a female sees this, she will come in and lay her eggs next to him, because he's trying to, try to impress her to act like he's a good dad about it. Darters are often a sign of good water quality. We find them in clear water, in situations sort of like this right here. You can see that there's a sand cobble bottom, gravel over here, and a mix of plants, not very deep, only a few inches at most right here. And yet I got like 4 or 5 species of darters right in this small space. And what's really crazy is this is the entire width of the stream right here, not much wider than this, not much deeper than this. And it's cornfields right to the edge on both sides. So you wouldn't think that there'd be much there. But the hydrology at this spot was fantastic. It had fantastic water quality, and the fish reflected that. And we got a bunch of sensitive species at this particular spot. Okay, so kind of the last story I'm going to tell. There's another group of fish called sculpins. We have several species in the Chicago region. One of the more unusual ones is something called a spoonhead sculpin. This was described by someone named Nelson in 1876, and his description is, through my friend, Mr. F.L. Rice of Evanston, I am enabled to make the present interesting addition to the lake fauna. The only specimen seen is the type, which was picked up on the shore of Lake Michigan near Evanston and placed in my hands for identification by Mr. Rice. And then the rest of this publication is a bunch of anatomical descriptions about how to recognize this species. Kind of the point is, this species was first discovered by science in Evanston, right here. All right, so that was the first specimen. The longer story, a little bit longer story, is that it was New Year's in 1876, and a massive storm and series of storms hit the Chicago region for several days. And these storms just absolutely roiled up the lake. After the storm subsided and passed, Frank Leon Rice, who was a zoology student at Northwestern University and a friend, I think his name was Shipman, something Shipman, took a walk along the lake. They found all kinds of debris. They found weird algae and plants. They found all kinds of mud puppies washed up on shore. And they found one specimen of a really weird fish that they did not know what it was. And so they gave it to Nelson, who wrote a paper and described it. Nelson put this, and part of the reason that no one had really seen this before around here is that this in the Chicago region, it lives a couple hundred to several hundred feet below the lake. But because of the storms, the lake got roiled up and it threw up a bunch of unusual fish on the shore. And these students just happened to get lucky and find it. Now, um, unfortunately, that first specimen, this is not the first specimen, the first specimen went into a collection, I believe, associated with the early version of the Chicago Academy of Science and disappeared, whether it was a fire or something else, I can't remember now, but that specimen was lost. Since then, we only have a half dozen at most records of this species in the Chicago region. And we haven't seen it in the Chicago region in decades. It is in the northern part of Lake Michigan and up into Canada, it's there. So the species is secure. It's just very, very rare around here. One of our rarest species, and very well could still be out there. But the problem is it is only like 3, 4, 5 inches long at most, and it lives in several hundred feet of water. So good luck trying to find it. And if you want to read more, yes, we have a bunch of papers on that. Yes, there are invasive species in the book. I'm not going to talk about them tonight because I want to put attention on the native species. You could give entire talks about all of these. Yes, Asian carp are in there. Weatherfish, round gobies, alewives, common carp, on and on, goldfish, sea lamprey, on and on and on. So they're covered in the book. I'm just not going to talk about them right now. So to just sort of wrap up, we needed support to publish this. And if you go to the front matter of the book, you will see the logo for the Association for the Wolf Lake Initiative, AWLI. And then if you go to the acknowledgement section, yes, you will find Michael Booz listed up there, Marianne Kozlowski, and Association for the Wolf Lake Initiative, AWLI, because publication was only possible through their generous support as we were trying to wrap up this project. And there were a lot of other acknowledgments. We have a couple pages worth of acknowledgments. I won't go through all of those right now. The book is available for pre-order right now. It comes out June 3. You can pick it up at University of Chicago Press, who is the publisher, and they were amazing to work with, by the way. I have nothing but great things to say about them. It's also available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, other booksellers. And I'm just going to close with a couple of things. One, this is something called the greater red horse. It's an endangered species in Illinois. We have a fair number of records in the Chicago region. The first Illinois record was in Salt Creek in 1901, has not been seen there since. If this book leads to a greater appreciation of our local fish, leads to greater conservation of our local fish, if we see the Chicago River getting better, the Lake Michigan getting better, Salt Creek, Des Plaines River, all of these types of places. If we see improvements and increases in fish numbers and rare fish, seeing greater red horse in Salt Creek, that'll be quite a jump. But if we see an improvement in the area, then I would consider this book a success. And that is sort of one of the goals of this book. And I'm just going to say one more thing before I wrap up. An hour ago, I looked up on Amazon to make sure everything was still there. And I did notice that the book is rated #1 in new release under the biology of fishes and sharks category. It may be the only new release in the category biology of fishes and sharks. I don't know. I didn't look into that. But we'll take whatever encouragement we can right now because it was a lot of work to get this done. And so anything positive is a great thing. So with that, I'm going to open the floor to questions. Let's see here. Here we go.
Hey, Phil, how you doing?
Hey, Blake, how are you?
Good, good. I just want to ask about the Iowa darter and bandy killifish. And do you describe their range not only in the Calumet region, but also throughout the Chicago area as well?
We do. You always ask such good questions because there is a lot of background story to both of those. We do include those in there. It is a little tricky because both those species ranges are changing relatively rapidly. The short version of that is the Iowa darter is one of those sensitive species that we have, was listed as threatened, but has been making a comeback in the Chicago region and in Illinois in general. and was recently delisted because it is becoming more common. It is still worth monitoring, and we do have up-to-date records of those in there. Banded killifish is another interesting one in that it was also listed as threatened for many years. And then we started finding them all over the place. And there was a lot of confusion. We thought, wow, something's happening. They are making this fantastic comeback. But then we looked at it in more detail and we realized that a lot of the records, or a lot of them, didn't look exactly like some of the others. So a number of us wrote a series of papers and discovered that there's actually two species of banded killifish, the western banded killifish and the eastern banded killifish. Western banded killifish is the native species around here and the one that's threatened. Eastern banded killifish is technically an invasive species, and that is the one that we've been finding more common. In other words, it has sort of invaded the region, Lake Michigan, through the Chicago area waterway systems into the Illinois River and such. And so a lot of the recent records were those. And so we have had a lot of discussions over the years about how to handle that. And so now we actually somewhat kind of refined the endangered species policy in the state because of banded killifish. So that western banded killifish, we were more specific. We said western banded killifish will remain threatened, whereas eastern banded killifish will not. So good question with a very complicated issue that actually both species have several research papers behind each of them. So I'll stop talking there on that.
And I was wondering if the non-native killifish affect the native Calumet population of the banded, and does it affect the population by interbreeding?
You're totally correct. They interbreed. And so we do see a lot of hybrids between the two. So if their ranges overlap, that is certainly the case. The western banded killifish, their primary strengths are in glacial lakes, or in lakes. And a lot of these lakes have water control structures on their outlets so that the eastern banded killifish cannot get into those systems, at least not very easily. So the western banded killifish are protected in that instance. But in other places where they can overlap, and we're seeing this in like over in Michigan, St. Joseph River, and up and down into Wisconsin now, they are hybridizing, and we are losing some of the western banded killifish. So no, you're completely correct. That's exactly what's happening.
And any other fish found in the Calumet area besides those two, like the pug-nosed shiner and others?
In the Calumet region, you mean?
Yeah, in places like Wolf Lake, Grand and Little Calumet Rivers, and Wolf Lake.
So yeah, one time, yeah, you're right. There were some of the pug nose were there in the past. Pirate perch were actually in there in the past. Not so much anymore. Unfortunately, they've been eliminated. There were some other minnows that unfortunately have been eliminated as well. But Iowa darters are still around. They may not be listed, but they're still pretty rare, and they are an indicator of decent water quality. We do still have the banded killifish in the Calumet region, and probably some others can't think of off the top of my head.
And one more question. I just want to ask about the lake sturgeon. I just want to find out if there used to be a breeding population of the sturgeon, especially at Indian Creek and places nearby.
Yeah, so people love lake sturgeon. There are books written on lake sturgeon, so I knew when I only talked about them for 5 minutes, I was really shorting that species because they have a fantastic history, a really fascinating, a lot of fascinating biology. The fish that I showed a picture of, that fish was 6 feet long. It was as big as me, basically. I know I'm not standing in front of you, but it's as big as a large person. And they routinely get up to 7 feet. That's not unusual. So 6, 7 feet is pretty common. They're big fish. They're amazing fish. They have actually found dinosaur fossils with sturgeon in their stomachs. So sturgeon were swimming around with dinosaurs, believe it or not, and they got fossilized together. So sturgeon have been around a long time. There's always been a lot of debate about where exactly sturgeon were in the Chicago region, particularly the Calumet region. And you will get a lot of opinions. I'll give you my opinion about what was probably going on. I will say that we do know that they used to be very common. There was a fishery for them in the late 1800s, and we have great records for that. Even catch data, and we even have records about where people could catch them in different places. Focusing on Wolf Lake and the Calumet, there's always been talk that they spawn in Wolf Lake. I don't believe so because historically, a couple of years ago, Wolf Lake was soft bottom, lots of vegetation, not running water. It was a wetland, which is great, but that's not where lake sturgeon spawn. They like running water with clean cobble, gravel, that sort of thing. They very well may have gone up the Calumet and may have gone up some of the streams high enough onto some of the moraines where you could get groundwater and clean water, and they could have spawned in situations like that. I would not be surprised if they were in Lake Calumet and Wolf Lake, but they would go there to feed. And we do see that now. They'll go to these places, they'll eat. I mean, it's a big fish, they eat a lot. So I have no doubt that they were in early Wolf Lake, early Lake Calumet, Calumet River feeding, but I don't think they spawned there. They probably spawned out in Lake Michigan, out on the shoal. Indiana has a lot of nice shoals in relatively shallow water. I strongly suspect, after taking a look at them, that they spawned there in the past, and that they have been known to spawn on shoals and lakes like that. So so I think the answer to your question is probably did not spawn in Indian Creek, Calumet River, Lake Calumet, Wolf Lake, but they probably did feed there. They may have spawned in some of the smaller streams coming off the moraines into the Little Cow, whatever, and maybe out in Lake Michigan nearby.
Yeah, I think the closest river for lake sturgeon spawning would probably be the Root River in Wisconsin. When you go upstream about 5 or 6 miles, you hit a natural canyon that they currently, the folks are looking at taking the dam out there that's covering up this canyon. But there's a little bit down below the dam, and it forms rapids. And lake sturgeon really love rapids, really fast water, large rocks. They can have been documented to spawn in water moving as fast as 5 meters per second, which is extremely fast. So they like those really high gradient, fast movers and moving water. And as Phil described, the waves in Lake Michigan on those shoals provide a really good potential source for spawning out there in the lake on the limestone.
Hi, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks for that presentation. I thought it was really interesting, and I loved the video component. I was just curious, like in your expert opinion, and after reflecting on all of this great research that's gone into the book, do you have any, what you say would be like the big ticket, both like water quality and policy items, but also habitat conservation sort of strategies that you say are the sort of like the big things that could really help better conserve and protect fish in the Chicago region?
Yeah, so it's always a struggle when you're doing aquatic conservation to get people to care about it because they can't see it. And so videos, like what I spent all morning trying to get those videos formatted, by the way. So thank you for liking them. That was a bit of an effort. Yeah. It's getting people to understand what's going on beneath the surface, and that stuff like that is going on beneath the surface, and that stuff like that is important. And we're still struggling with that in the Chicago River along the Chicago lakefront. I was out there a couple weeks ago talking with a class, and just trying to get across how important this is, even if you can't really see what's going on out there. So I think the first step is always trying to get people connected with it, getting people to appreciate it and stuff like that. And we know that this is a successful strategy, and that's sort of the first step. And then Chicago River, like Friends of Chicago River, has done a great job with their name, Friends. Try to get friends with that. And that has spilled over to a lot of these watershed groups. There's Friends of the Fox River, Friends, all these types of things. And so that, get people activated and motivated and then kind of do those types of things. And then the trick is, what can you do about it? Water is sort of tricky from a conservation. I talk to a lot of people, and they're people doing like butterfly conservation and bird conservation, and they go, "Yeah, we can do this in our backyard. We can plant milkweeds." Water, doesn't work that way. That's really hard. Um, you really need to work with various municipalities. You got to work with whoever has regulation over those and try to sway them in one way or another. They can make the biggest impact. Basically, they can do that unless you're working with a landowner that has enough land that can actually make an impact. And that's tough in a watershed because water comes from one place to another, and you're getting whatever's upstream coming to you downstream like that. So you're going to have to work out, make the connection with the people, try to work with government officials or whatever groups are overseeing that type of thing. Water quality is always important, and habitat is always important. And there's those two aspects of it. And they don't always jive the way you think they might. The reason I say this, and I'm always a little afraid to say this, is that many fish are a bit more tolerant of pollution than people realize. And so, we want to clean up the water. And the main reason we want to do that is often so for human contact, drinking water, security, all those, we want clean water. Um, but you look in the Chicago River, yes. But even if you clean up all the pollution out of the Chicago River, you'd still be hard pressed to get a lot of species of fish in there because the habitat is so terrible. And that's really the big impediment, is that places like the Chicago River and parts of the Calumet and like the Cal-Sag Channel, they're just these chutes with no habitat. And if there's a major storm, floodwaters go through there and just flush everything out. And these poor fish, they don't know what they're doing. And it takes a while for them to get back. And there's very few places. What they really want is a meandering river or stream with all kinds of deadfalls in it and rocks and debris and, a very mixed match heterogeneous environment. That's what you want to do. But that, of course, doesn't work with water flow for transportation and sanitation, where you're trying to get the water to go through. So you sort of have those conflicting things. I would say that the situation now that I'm seeing in the Chicago area waterway system and in many of our other rivers is a lot different than it was 2 decades ago, and it's a lot better now. We are seeing more habitat. We're seeing more people receptive to that, and we're certainly moving in. I would say we're moving in the right direction, not as quickly as I would like, possibly, and I'm going to guess that most people would agree with me. But I mean, at least we're moving in the right direction. So does that sort of get at what your question was? I don't. We could talk. You and I could. We could talk about this forever. I know you have a lot of
Mhm.
opinions.
It does, yeah. Thank you, and I couldn't agree more.
And I guess that if we can use fish, like in the book, to help promote some of these strategies, use them as flagship species, then yeah, go for it. That would be a fantastic.
Bill, one question here. We've got things like zebra mussels and whatever, the quagga, whatever mussels. Do any of the native species eat those? Obviously, not enough native species eat those to make a difference, but do those help any native species?
I mean, helping would be a bit of a stretch.
Well, feeding
Yeah,
them,
yeah.
maybe.
No, I understand what you're saying. No, I get what I just understand you. I'm teasing you a little bit. Um, yeah, there are some that do that. So now a large, not a large, an adult zebra quagga mussel is about the size, I mean, maybe of your thumbnail, a bit bigger than that, maybe twice the size of your thumbnail. There are not many native fish that eat them that large. That's a
Mm.
bit outside their range. Those are a bit hard to eat.
Mhm.
But they do start off very small. Not pinhead small, but I mean smaller than a pea, that small. And there are native fish that do that. I have seen freshwater drum with stomachs full of zebra mussels. They've just been out there eating them. And I mentioned the river red horse that has the jaws that can crush mollusks. Freshwater drum can do the same thing, and they will eat a lot of them as well. There are other fish that will do that, but just not in the numbers
Yeah.
that we really see. And there certainly aren't enough of them in Lake Michigan, unfortunately, to make a difference. The fish that does eat many of them would be the other invasive, the round goby,
Mm.
does eat them. And it does appear that maybe their foraging strategies do have an impact on where exactly you do find the zebra mussels. Because, for instance, you find zebra mussels, or quagga mussels, I should say now, more frequently on vertical surfaces than you do on horizontal for some reason. For some reason, you don't see many on horizontal out in Lake Michigan anymore. And I don't know if it's because the zebra or the round gobies are better at predating them on that type of surface or not. So I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. I don't know if Frank has anything he wants to jump in and say.
No, it's just been fun working with you and Steve. The past 5 or 6 years, really, we cranked it up and fun writing everything up. The most fun part for me was always going back to those old historic documents that you showed, like the Seth Meek, and going through those and finding where the fish were and plotting those in maps and things like that. So it's been really fun. Um, Overall, I think we started working on it 28 years ago when I graduated college. So it's been a progress.
No,
Like
whose
quickly
idea was it?
what's that?
Whose idea was it to write the book?
The little story goes that I was graduating U of I, and I went to Larry Page, who wrote the field guide for North American, the Peterson Field Guide, amongst lots of other fish books and fish papers. He's kind of the one of the godfathers of North American fishes. And I asked him to do a master's program with him, and he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm retiring this year. I'm not going to be able to do it." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "But an idea for you is if you're going to Chicago, why don't you write the Fishes of Chicago region book?" So I was like, "Okay, that's not a bad idea." And so this was in 1998. But I worked on it a couple years and quickly realized that I was not going to be able to finish this by myself. So I quickly recruited Steve and Phil to join the team. So we've been working on this together over 20 years, probably,
Wow.
putting in all our little experiences and knowledge bits. And the photos Phil has taken are amazing and stunning. All the photos, pretty much all the photos in the book are Phil's, except for a handful. And without those, it'd be a lot much boring book and less intriguing. The other fun part was the maps. That took a long time to keep collecting data. Every time we'd have a little lull in our book, we'd have to, when we start up again, we'd have to collect all new data again. Biologists are just constantly collecting gobs of fish data. And so our book's probably already out of date with all the new data that's been generated. So hopefully they'll make us do another edition soon. They need a break. Yeah.
I should say I just got my copy today. It was just mailed to me today.
All right.
So, and it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful book.
Yeah. University of
Thank you
Chicago.
for that.
Great. Yeah. And thank you for your support. Yeah. Yeah. Both your mental
I have
support.
asked, I have asked the Forest Preserve District of Cook County, who give volunteer recognition gifts out, if they would consider the book as a volunteer recognition gift. You put in 100 or 200 or 300 hours, depending upon the price on the object, on the item. So maybe there will be other stewards interested.
Yeah. Definitely volunteer. We definitely didn't get paid, and we're going to put in our own funds, which we thank you for helping with.
You're very welcome.
Cool.
I'm just going to say, I still ask Larry Page fish and taxonomy questions whenever there's some disagreement. I'm like, Larry, what's going on with such and such? And so even all these years later, we still talk and figure these things out. So
Okay, so it's probably way too soon to ask, but about when would a second edition? I don't even, obviously, I don't even think you need a second edition now, although you say, you keep getting data. But, what would be a time schedule for that? Or is there, I mean, would you have to look at that 5 or 8 years down the road, or what would you do?
So interestingly, not having published a book before, we learned a lot of things. That's in the contract.
No,
Second
really?
edition about, yes, about when to do it. I forget when to do it. And if you decide not to do it, they reserve the right to find somebody else to do it.
Oh,
So they are that's somewhat in their hand. I mean, it's negotiated back and forth.
yeah.
And I don't mean that to make it sound harsh or anything. They've been amazing to work with, and but that's actually something they think through
Hmm.
and talk about, and we had discussions about that.
Hmm.
Um, Another thing is it takes a year or two to get a book printed.
Hmm.
And so this book coming out now was about a year old. And in the past year, papers have been coming out changing fish scientific names. So by the time it comes out, there's already, I'm looking through it and I'm going, oh, I got to change that name. Oh, I got to change this name. Now, to most people, the scientific name is not going to make a big difference if it's changed slightly. And these are pretty minor changes like that. So yeah, they are thinking about second edition. I already have a page of things to change. There's always changes in fish distributions, all like that. How that happens, I don't know. As Frank said, we're done writing right now. We need a break. I'm done. I don't want to deal with anything more. But I have been taking notes about what to do. As I go through it, I am so happy with it. But I also go, oh, I should have said this. Oh, we could have done that. I think we may be our worst critic as I'm going through, and I'm also legitimately curious about people's feedback about how to make it better, too, because I'm not going to sit here and say it's perfect or anything like that. But I am curious about what works, what doesn't. Like I mentioned, those pictures of those extinct Cisco's. We went back and forth as the authors about what's the best way to handle that, and we kind of went with that one. Now maybe we should have gone with old line drawings from a 1920 publication, or maybe the specimen. I don't know. Here again, we'll see. I am kind of curious about how useful people find it, and if there are ways to make it more useful. The problem is it's at 500 pages even right now, which I didn't think it was that long until it arrived. I was like, wow, wonder it took so long to write this thing. Um, they don't want longer books. We know other people that are writing fishes of whatever state or region, and they want to do super comprehensive guides, including absolutely everything. But you are not going to publish 1,000-page book on fishes anymore. People don't have appetites for that.
Mhm.
So this is about as long as it's going to be, probably right here. So it's not like we can add a bunch more stuff to it.
Mhm.
But how could we revise and put more things in there? Another amazing thing is the number of color pictures, because color pictures, the price skyrockets once you start doing that. I have no idea. Right now, it's being sold for $35. I don't know how they kept the price at that level with that many color pictures and maps and everything, because that's almost unheard of. I don't know how they did it. Comparable books like this are going for $70 to $100 in some places, which is crazy. I wrote a book chapter on South American rivers, and I have a chapter in there. That book is selling for $220. I don't know who buys these things. I mean, outside so the fact that they had that many, and they aren't even printing color pictures in there. It's all black and white, grainy black and white pictures. So I mean, so that has to be taken into consideration too. So it was a big learning curve about the whole book writing, processing, publishing
Mhm.
process. That
Well,
we're still,
I'll bring that guide along when I come on that tour for the AWLI Festival.
oh, there you go. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I'll be asking you questions on that tour.
Oh, okay.
Who are the plants?
Anything else? I think we're getting kind of tired. Bill is so difficult to listen to.
More videos. That's what I'm hearing. More videos.
More videos, yeah.
Actually, I agree. I love videos.
And anyway, the two of you did a great job, and congratulations on the project. And I can't be happier that it's done, and it's just great. So I'm going to close up here now, and as soon as I find out.
Yeah, we're thinking we might have a little book party, especially down on the south side where I grew up right by Wolf Lake. So
Yes.
we're thinking of having it at Lost Marsh Golf Course. I will let you and Mary Ann know for sure.
Oh,
If we're
yes,
gonna,
and we'll get the word out.
cool.
I'm trying to